And welcome to this Thursday night edition of Western Standard Online. We're so very glad that you could join us from across the fruited plains in this wonderful country of ours. I am Marc Patrone, host of Saga 960's, the Marc Patrone radio program. You can check that out anytime to find out what we talk about on that show. Oftentimes it's politics, it's crazy, and we do talk a lot about Alberta. Now, a couple of days ago, we had a rather spirited, you could call it that anyway, certainly based on many of the comments that we saw, a spirited discussion around whether or not the Conservative Party of Canada, specifically under the leadership of Erin O'Toole, had abandoned Conservatives. And let's just say we had pretty divergent views on that count, although many of those who commented thought that, in fact, Erin O'Toole is certainly not the true blue conservative that a lot of people thought they were getting, and as a result, Erin O'Toole is in a lot of political trouble these days. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Alberta, specifically Jason Kenney, the premier of the province, a guy who swept to power a couple of years ago, 2019, having united the old Wildrose Party and the old PC Party of Alberta. Everybody had incredible expectations about this guy. He'd come from the federal scene, had been a very successful federal cabinet minister. He'd been on the short list of people that many expected would one day be Prime Minister of Canada. But he came back to Alberta, came back home, and took over the reins of the United Party, swept to power, defeated the hated NDP. Next thing you know, he is Premier of the province. Expectations were high now. The question is, have those expectations been met? Well, I would suggest that there is a resounding no right across the province. I don't know, disappointment. Now, maybe when you have really high expectations like that, well, it's hard to meet those expectations. But even given that, some people think that Jason Kenney, frankly, has crapped the bed. But so we're going to ask that question this evening. Has Jason Kenney failed? Can his political woes basically be healed? You know, can he turn things around in time for the next election? Or is he done? So my guests today include Dave Naylor, a guy that I worked with at the Calgary Sun when I was with the late great Sun News Network, and Corey Morgan, of course, who did a great job a couple of days ago manning that what some people thought was a bit of a dumpster fire. I personally thought it went pretty well. Also, we're going to hear from Paul Hinman a little later on in the show. He is the leader of, well, I guess you could call it the resurrected Wildrose Party. The World Wildrose is in the name of the party, the Wildrose Independence Party. So obviously, Paul has some strong views about the future of Alberta in Canada. So, guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Sorry, Mark. Good to be with you again. Good start.
All right. So let's start the discussion here. First off, I guess the big question is what happened? All right. So, Corey, I mean, all these expectations were high that Kenney was going to be the man, that he was going to be loved and beloved by Albertans. And it really hasn't worked that way, has it?
No, it's been a letdown, you know, and I was really excited, enthusiastic about it. I mean, there was a lot of debate leading up to even when Jason Kenney took the leadership of the United Conservative Party. That meant a merger of the Wildrose Party and the old Progressive Conservatives. There were a lot of people with their heels dug in on both sides within those parties. I'd been involved with the Wildrose Party since its inception. I had come out in support of merging. I said, Jason Kenney's the guy. This is the way we got to go. We've got to swallow our pride because the NDP is just such a terrible circumstance to be stuck under as a provincial government. And we got all the way to the point where we have Premier Jason Kenney now, which great. Okay, we hit the end goal. And I mean, you know, Jason Kenney, you can't underestimate him. I mean, he works hard. He got that merger through. He won that election. But now we're seeing.
No, exactly. Who would have thought, Dave Naylor, that Brian Jean would have been the Nostradamus? He's the guy who had every opportunity to join this government. He's the one who lost the race, obviously, for the leadership of the United Party. But rather than joining the team, he kind of went his own way. He had serious reservations about Jason Kenney. People thought he was crazy at the time. But in retrospect, maybe he knew something that the rest of us didn't. What do you think?
You know what? He may have been right. He's certainly doing something in the background of this situation. He's got his own website that he occasionally puts out, some pretty good messages that on what Kenney should be doing. But everything Kenney has touched in the last 6-7 months has become a disaster.
Example. Give us some details.
Well, I'll give you several details. The UCP.
I knew you would, Dave.
Yeah, the UCP snowbird scandal, where like it seemed like half his caucus flew to Hawaii or Arizona while the province was in a lockdown, and we couldn't see our families at Christmas, and we couldn't hold Christmas gatherings, but that didn't matter to UCP folk. They flew out, and everybody agrees, I think, that Kenney's handling of that crisis was a disaster. Then he lost, $1 billion or so bucks in the Keystone XL when President Biden put a stop to it, and Kenney invested that money, and with $6 billion in loan guarantees to TC Energy, even after Biden, the candidate, said he was going to stop it. So that was questionable. His government's coal mining policy in the Rockies received absolutely massive objections from the public, and he had to backtrack on that. And the COVID restrictions are now what is the huge problem in Alberta. He has promised certain things at certain times. If we can reach certain benchmarks, things will reopen. Right. And earlier this month, we had reached those benchmarks and even exceeded them, and things did not reopen. Only libraries reopened, and some gyms were able to have some minor programs, but the broader openings were not promised. At that point, 6 UCP caucus members came out publicly. A good chunk of his caucus came out publicly and said, "Mr. Premier, you're wrong." A few days later, the policy was changed, and we're now basically fully into step 2. So when you've got these open rebellions against him, I think currently he's in big trouble, especially now he's polling in Alison Redford numbers in the 20s, and Rachel Notley would be Premier Notley again if an election was held today. So we're now closer to his next election than we were to his when he was elected. So the time is now growing short for him to be able to turn this around, and there's a lot of questions. Yeah. A lot of questions whether he can or not, Mark.
Well, that's a pretty scary thought. Premier Notley Part 2, Corey. I can't imagine that Albertans would make that same mistake twice. I was there the day that she won, and it was a shocker. I think it sent shockwaves right across the country. Nobody anticipated that Rachel Notley would be premier, but sure enough, thanks to, I guess, a not-so-good campaign that was run at the time by Jim Prentice, bless his heart. But it was a failure on the part of the PCs. People had had enough, and they made a big change. But I think when Kenney came in, I thought, I was among many who thought, okay, well, that's it for the NDP. I mean, they were one and done. It would always be that way. But here it is. They're surging again, thanks to a lot of disgruntled people who are frankly not very happy with the performance of Jason Kenney. But there's a lot to unpack in what Dave just said, Corey, and not the least of which includes his criticisms of Kenney's resource policy. Yeah, a lot of money, provincial money did go in, but a lot of federal money went into it as well. I mean, who could have anticipated, I guess, that Biden would have won the way he did and then changed the policies. And on the first day on the job, Corey, that hurt a lot, canceling Keystone. Do you really have to blame Kenney for that? I mean, should he bear the entire brunt of that, or was he doing what he thought was best?
Well, just because somebody was doing something they thought was best doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. And Jason Kenney had established himself as the first head of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I remember him getting on Ralph Klein's case in the 90s about MagCan and Swan Hills and Gainers, because we had all of these areas where the government went into business and lost our money every time. Novotel. It's just, of all premiers who would dip into the business game with taxpayers' dollars, Kenney would have been, I thought, the last one to do it, or at least a lot more carefully. I mean, Biden had made it clear a year ago that if he was going to win, he was going to shut that pipeline down. I mean, we were kind of hoping that maybe it was just posturing and that, he'd kind of kick it down the road. But when he said on day one that this thing's down, that means he's not backing down on that. That's a whole presidential plank. So, I mean, you can't lay it on Kenney to not be able to predict the future with what an American election is going to lead to, but he should have known better than to put Canadian and Albertan tax dollars into a private investment. That's just not what we're about. He should have been fighting to make sure that we can just have these private enterprises keep getting their infrastructure through in the first place. That's what a conservative is supposed to do.
Okay, so he rolled the dice and he rolled snake eyes, Dave. I guess that's what happened here, and Albertans are ticked off about it. I mean, it was a tremendous amount of tax money. I mean, the deficit, what's the deficit in Alberta right now? I mean, the finances are, you're a long way of balancing the budget, correct?
Look, it was only a few years ago that we had pictures of Premier Ralph Klein holding up a big sign saying paid in full because Alberta was debt free. Now I think we're talking about a figure of $120 billion, and it's just crazy. And I think the majority of people in Alberta that voted for Jason Kenney have been disappointed in his performance. They elected a guy who vowed to stand up for Alberta to the feds, to the Liberals. They wanted pickup truck Jason Kenney, but it seems like what they've got is suit and tie Jason Kenney. I was talking to a good friend of mine today, Mark. I'll give you an example. And he supported Jason Kenney in the last election and voted for him. And he says he's just so disappointed in the actions of the premier and his failure to take meaningful action. And now he says he won't vote for him in the next election. He can't bring himself to vote for Rachel Notley again, but he says he's going to stay home and not vote for Kenney. So I think a lot of his supporters are feeling that way at the moment.
Well, a lot of comments, actually. I'm going to read a couple of them. This is Rob Chapman. Whoops, I think it was just, okay, here he is. Lots of controversy about how Kenney won the leadership race for the UCP. And where did Kenney get the money for Keystone? So really, we're still there. I mean, there are still debates and controversies around the way he won. I mean, at the time, it seemed that Kenney was a foregone conclusion, the winner. I mean, I didn't think there was any great controversy around that, but I guess what people are concerned about, backers, people who supported Kenney, and whether or not he's a puppet of somebody. Is that the deal here, Corey?
Well, there's actually some criminal investigations going on from the last leadership race. Those are still active. That's kind of a bigger picture, something Notley brought in with government controlling leadership races now, which led to a lot of pitfalls with how you can fund your race and so on, almost like it was an election. And one of the contenders, Jeff Callaway, ran afoul of a lot of the funding rules and such, and people felt that he might have been a dark horse candidate there to support Kenney. So it just stunk. And then there was a lot of questions about pins because it was a mail-in ballot and the conspiracy theories start. And now with he never did seem to consolidate his support among the constituencies, among non-supporters since becoming the leader, and they still don't trust him. And we're still seeing active revolution under his feet. We're seeing constituency associations pushing for a leadership review. It can get dangerous, because if his caucus members start fearing for their seats, we saw what happened with Redford, with Stelmach, with Stéphane Dion. I mean, when your own caucus turns on you, you're toast. So he's really got to turn this around fast. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Alberta has a long history of turning on its leaders once it seems that the poll numbers start to slip and they're showing signs of potentially losing seats. But you know what, Dave? I'm going to push back a little bit on the perception of Kenney as being pickup truck guy. I saw Kenney in Ottawa, I'd say maybe 10 years ago, and he never struck me as the kind of guy who was a quote-unquote populist, a pickup truck guy. I mean, this is a guy who had aspirations of becoming prime minister one day. I think he sees himself as a cut above everybody else. And maybe that's one of the things that kind of works against him. There's a sense that he's not really one of them, is it? One of us in terms of we, the Albertan people, that he somehow thinks he's slumming it as Premier of Alberta on the way to something better. And do you get the sense that has undermined support for Kenney amongst the average voter in Alberta, Dave?
Well, there's some who think that, Mark. I mean, remember, he drove the entire length and breadth of the province in a big blue pickup truck wearing, blue jeans and a cowboy shirt.
How
So,
much of that was phony? How much of that was phony in retrospect right now?
well, looking in retrospect and what he's done since, a good chunk of it. He used to be the guy that ate dinner at the Blackfoot Diner, close to where he lives.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of people are saying that, yeah, he's still that Ottawa politician and not an Albertan. One of the problems, Mark, was that a lot of the UCP political staff that they brought in were from Toronto, and they had never lived in Alberta, and they had never, seen what Albertans have gone through, and that sort of thing. So their style of messaging and the way they did it and their responses sometimes didn't go down overly well, and the public didn't like the way it was handled, and there was some pushback in this tragedy, and basically saying, you guys don't understand the way we think out here. So there has been some of that. I'll agree with you, but the persona that he put forth in the campaigns was pickup truck Jason, because he went everywhere in that thing, but on tens of thousands of kilometers. So.
Yeah, I mean, Prentice did the same thing too. But I tell you, there's seems to be the kind of Aaron O'Toole syndrome here working against Kenney. I mean, a lot of people thought that O'Toole was going to be Mr. True Blue Conservative. That's the way he touted himself. He used that as a relentless weapon against Peter MacKay, whom he dubbed as, a liberal light kind of deal. And so in the same breath, now he's in there, and a lot of people think that was phony. And so in the same way, I think it heightens and it brings out, Corey, this cautionary tale that if you're going to put yourself out there as one thing, and then once you get in, you're something different, it's going to alienate the people who got you there. And maybe that's the lesson here. What do you think?
Well, yeah, Albertans are crabby. I mean, we've had 10 years of kind of turning over parties and kicking some out and bringing some in. Like, we want somebody to come in and fit what we're looking to do. I mean, to be fair, I don't think it was totally disingenuous or fake when Kenney was going around in the truck. He did know that that's what Albertans will respond to. I did sit down with him a couple of times over the campaign, or even spoke with him last fall in that interview. And I think he was genuine, but I think he can't seem to figure out how to lead the group he actually managed to win the leadership of. He can't herd these cats because he isn't perhaps as in tune with what grassroots Alberta politics are like anymore. He's long forgotten what the old reform days were like. And that's a lot more what the Wildrose element and those type of people in the party are. And he just can't seem to learn to manage it. And then, turning back to Toronto-style politics, those are not well received out here.
I mean, to Dave's point, I mean, bringing in people from outside Alberta and then being shocked that they're not really in touch with how Albertans feel, I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, obviously you have to use people who are aware of the sentiments of Albertans. But I think when Kenney got in, he almost wanted to change the province somehow. He wanted to change the perception of the province. And so by bringing people in from outside, he was maybe trying to put a fresh coat of paint on the way that the province is portrayed. Unfortunately, it may have backfired. Now, how much damage has that done to Kenney's brand, and can he recover from that, Dave?
Well, let's look at something called the Fair Deal panel, Mark. This was a panel that traveled all around the province and came up with a list of ideas to get Alberta back into the Confederation game. Everything from its own provincial police force to its own income taxes, and because that's what Alberta wanted. And really, Kenney has not done anything in response to that Fair Deal panel. He has basically set up other panels to study what the panel has said. This is the only job creation plan that seems to be working, is to become a member of one of these Fair Deal panels. He has taken extremely tiny steps forward. He's formed the Alberta Parole Board, but in terms of the major deals, absolutely no steps. His his thought process is still you got to play nice with Justin Trudeau and and see how that turns out, which I don't think is what Albertans wanted to see when they elected him. They wanted somebody who was stronger and to stand up to Trudeau. And he's promised a referendum on equalization in the next at the time of the next the time of the next provincial election. And of course, that's going to be overwhelmingly against equalization in Alberta. Of course, it will be. So we all know that. So why hasn't he taken further steps now instead of this sort of stuff down the road? As the next guest coming on, Paul Hinman, he and I have talked before, and he says every time Trudeau opens his mouth now, he gets more members signed up because Albertans don't seem to be happy with what Kenney's been doing so far, Mark.
Yeah, I want to read you a couple of these comments because some of them are pretty hard hitting. This is Kyle D. Wickenstrom. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm so sick of these Eastern charlatans coming in and duping Albertans into electing them. So he's saying that Kenney is, if I understand this correctly, that Kenney is an Eastern charlatan. I mean, he is an Albertan, Corey. I mean, but maybe he's not the same kind of Albertan that a lot of people.
Well, they call it.
Is that fair?
Yeah, they call it Ottawa syndrome or dome disease or a number of those things. I mean, he is an Albertan who spent a heck of a lot of time in Ottawa. He was a cabinet minister, when in government. So it wasn't even like being a backbencher opposition MP that's going to spend a lot of time at home in the constituency. He's in Ottawa at that office and working, which you can't fault him for exactly, but you can see how that would make him lose touch with Albertans, and something that he's worked with bureaucrats. He's worked with that giant Ottawa machine. Perhaps that's part of it. I think it was Cheryl. I missed the name that came through in the comments, but she made a good point. Like, what can he do? And it's towards what Dave said too, though. Kenney keeps striking panels. He keeps talking about doing things, but we're grumpy Albertans. We want to see some action. No more panels, no more commissions, no more talk. Do something, strike back at Ottawa, find a way, form that police force. We've had 10 commissions on it over the last 20 years. You were there when Harper penned the firewall letter. Like, let's see some action because we've seen enough talk.
Well, how much of this is about the fact that the economy has not done well, Dave? I mean, this was always the argument that was given to me when I was in Alberta and learning about the province and growing to love the province. People said, well, people at the time didn't like Alison Redford, and they had issues around the falling price of oil after that. But they always said that once the price of oil gets back up, people are going to start working again. They're going to start making money again, and they're going to forget all about politics, and the Tories will sweep to power. And now we've got oil at $65 for West Texas Intermediate. I mean, are people starting to feel a little bit better about the price of oil? And as a result, could Kenney's fortunes be tied to a rebounding economy in Alberta? What do you think about that, Dave?
Well, I think it would certainly help. But look, Rachel Notley was not handed a gift when oil prices went in the toilet. Jason Kenney was not handed a gift when the COVID pandemic, hit the country, devastated the economy. But Mark, you remember downtown Calgary when you lived here? It was a bustling little place. Now it's a ghost town. Literally is a ghost town. Middle of the day, and there's nobody on the Stephen Avenue Mall. Not a soul to be seen. So yeah, I mean, I think oil prices are above $70 now, so there is that glimmer of hope. But we are in such a deep hole that it's going to take a long time to try and dig out of. And the job losses were absolutely incredible. And it's going to take time to regain those jobs. And the question is, all the companies that laid off workers by the thousands and thousands, are they going to recall them? Probably not. So there's no doubt a better economy will certainly help, but I don't think the average Albertan sees that coming anytime soon. And in fact, we had a story on our Western Standard Online website yesterday with the Bank of Canada governor saying, the economy is not coming back until 2023. So it's a long way away, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and in the midst of all that, you've got Albertans who feel that the rest of the country doesn't care. So here it is, Albertans in trouble. Alberta, of course, has pumped hundreds of billions of dollars into the national economy. So we've been able to pay for schools and hospitals across the country thanks to the resource wealth of Alberta, which it has shared more or less happily with the rest of the country, knowing full well that everybody was going to benefit because it was part of the Canadian family. And now, of course, it's Alberta that's in trouble. And so I can well understand why Albertans would look at the rest of the country and say, well, how about helping us now? We're in the dumps. We need help, and you're not there for us. What is going on? And then on top of all that, getting back, Corey, to Kenny, you've got a guy, instead of fighting for Alberta, seems to be sort of working more with Trudeau, the Liberals. I mean, maybe that's his way of trying to get help for Alberta. I guess that's his style, but it's not working. I mean, this guy is no Ralph Klein, is he?
No, and I guess maybe he does recognize Trudeau is one of our biggest problems because the oil prices are coming back. But if you talk to actually guys in the capital business who are trying to raise funds to get things going, Alberta's a pariah because they're not going to put money into a province when we have a hostile federal government that's saying they're going to shut in the oil field. A government that had regulated Energy East out of existence, that shut down Northern Gateway and has made a catastrophe out of the Trans Mountain. So until we see some better signals from Ottawa about our resource industry out here, investors aren't going to touch it, and you can't really blame them. So there's something more than the price of oil involved here as well. We need investor confidence, and that's shot in Alberta right now. And Kenny, how to gain that, fighting with, he's trying to do it perhaps with the nice way with Trudeau. Maybe it's time to start fighting with them. So just since you got me, I'm going to back out here, though, because Paul's ready to roll. And
all right. Thank you, Corey. Appreciate that.
All righty.
Yeah, look, there's so much there to talk about. Paul Hinman joining us. Okay, there he is. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the show. We really appreciate that.
Well, thanks, Mark. Thanks. Hello, Dave.
All right. Now, earlier I said that you were the leader of the resurrected Wildrose Party, but that's not entirely true, is it? I mean, tell us about. I mean, it's not the same Wildrose Party that it was under Danielle Smith. I mean, that party had a lot of success, as you well know. It didn't quite get the brass ring, and then of course there was that notorious crossing of the floor over to join Jim Prentice, shocking many in Alberta who really felt that the Wildrose Party had a serious shot at becoming the next government. But it didn't happen. There was a uniting of the two, and then things didn't work out so well, and a lot of Albertans became very disgruntled, and that's where your party comes in. Please pick up the ball from there.
Well, thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure being here. It's interesting listening to your discussion up till now. And again, your question is Jason a conservative? And I want to start off by saying, if he went out on the football field with a basketball and says, hey, let's play ball here, it doesn't make the basketball a football. And Jason is certainly no conservative in what he's been doing. But the Wildrose Independence Party is actually a merger from Wexit, which got started when Trudeau got elected in 2019, and then the Freedom Conservative Party. And, good conservative policies in government that they keep, they're always being recycled and brought back. And so, if you go back to the Alberta Alliance, you go back to the Wildrose, all of those policies are coming forward. But what's been missing in all of those is the realization that Alberta is never going to get a fair deal in this confederation. Our constitution is flawed, and that the seven wolves literally get to vote to take the lambs from the five sheep year after year, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's constitutionally okay. Equalization, has been implemented into the 60s and 70s, and yes, we can vote on it this fall. But boy, Jason has been pretty pathetic in showing that his promise of jobs, pipelines, and standing up to Ottawa. I mean, this is 3 strikes and he's out.
Yeah, absolutely. What a disappointment. I mean, a lot of people outside Alberta, like I lived in Alberta for a couple of years and loved the province. We had to move east once the economy tanked, and my employer at the time basically went under. It was the Sun News Network. I was based in Calgary, and I would have been happy to stay out there. But a lot of us wonder what is taking Alberta so long to get to the point of even having a referendum. I mean, it's painfully clear that you're basically being abused. I mean, Alberta's been abused for years, and I always wondered why didn't Albertans have a referendum earlier, just to put pressure. I mean, let's not forget, and I understand, when I was out there, I put forward, and I asked that question to many people, and they said, well, you know, we don't quite have the support, you know, 30%, maybe 35%. You know, what's the point of having a referendum if you're not going to win? Well, you know, Quebec had 2 of them. And I think that Quebec gets a lot of what it wants these days, has been for decades. So maybe Albertans, just by creating a crap storm and by pushing this agenda forward, and by the way, you know, the federal government is sensitive to the perception of Canada outside. And so if it starts becoming apparent that a province like Alberta is looking seriously at some kind of separation or independence agreement, then it's going to be one of those things that undermines the image of the entire country. I mean, that's one of the things that maybe Albertans should consider as they look forward. What's it going to take for Albertans to move forward with a referendum? I'll pose that to Dave.
It's a good question. I think Paul might have been the better one to.
Well, let's punt it back to Paul. Sorry, I mean, I thought maybe give Paul a chance to get a breather here since he finished talking. All right. Let's hear from you, Paul.
You and I have been talking for 30 minutes now. It's Paul's turn.
Okay, Paul, what's it going to take for Albertans to get to the point of where they think, okay, you know what, it's time, first of all, to spend some money, federal, you know, provincial money, and do a serious report. Look at the pros and cons of independence from the provincial point of view, and say, okay, let's spend $500,000 and get a really good report on the pluses and minuses of independence. And then work from that report, have the town halls, and then eventually put the question out to Albertans. What's wrong with that strategy?
Well, it's fair enough to bring that up, Mark, but the fact of the matter is that when we've been in a broken and a dysfunctional relationship that's turned toxic now, where the Prime Minister, the cabinet, they clearly said that they want to shut down our major industry here, our secondary industry, beef. It's right on, you know, number 2 on their target, and they have animosity towards us. I mean, we can go back to the 70s and the National Energy Program that, you know, hit in there in the late 70s, the 80s. This has always been, we can't allow these people to succeed. We need to suppress them, oppress them. We need to stop them in their tracks, but we've always been able to. But now we're getting to that point in our relationship where more and more Albertans realize that, wow, this is a no-win situation. We need a divorce. We need to be a sovereign nation. And for many Albertans, there's no question that we're better off to be on our own, especially if you just talk the economics. You know, you talked about the $600 billion that's left Alberta to help the rest of Canada. The equalization payments, it's just the process that it lags 2 years. What kind of a program is that, other than the ones directed at when you're hurting? We're not going to respond for 2 years because we want to, you know, it's not good enough that you're down. We want to keep kicking you for a couple of years. There's no love lost from Ottawa to Alberta, and Albertans are realizing that. And again, COVID has been another kick to us that we have a premier who wants to follow lockstep and barrel with the federal government and the federal health minister and continue to shut down and hurt us. It's an incredible amount of pain that Albertans are taking on, and they've come to the realization that this is a broken, dysfunctional relationship, and the Wildrose Independence Party is here to give people hope and an option and a different choice.
Well, let's see if they take it seriously. I mean, that's the real question here, isn't it? Whether Albertans are going to look at your party, Paul, and say, you know, this is a viable option for us, that independence is something that we should look seriously at. But in order for that to happen, I think you need the government to step forward and say, you know what, let's give this a serious look. Let's put together a report. And you know,
well, you're sounding like a Kenney fan to do another report. He's done so many reports. I think he works for the university or the Laurentian elites or something. That no, we don't need more reports. We need the Firewall Plus implemented, and he's failed to do that. And again, with this referendum, what's he going to do after we already know it's going to be overwhelmingly popular for Albertans to say equalization is wrong. You got to take it out. You know, the one question is should Section 36 be pulled out of the Constitution? Albertans are going to vote yes. But do you think, we know nothing's going to change. So what's Premier Kenney going to do then? Say, oh, well, next year we're going to send a registered letter and we're going to tell him he has to respond. But the response is going to be easy. It's just like the dad when the teenager wants the keys to the car and he hasn't done what he's supposed to do, and they just shrug their shoulders and say, nope, sorry, not getting it.
Yeah, I mean,
Mark,
sure, go ahead.
Mark,
Go ahead, Dave.
The report you're talking about is already being done. The Alberta
Right.
Fair Deal Panel.
Well, I didn't think that's not a report about independence, though, is it specifically?
It's a report about what Alberta needs to get back in the Confederation game. And that was handed to Kenney a long time ago. And where Albertans are frustrated is that no concrete steps have been taken. As I mentioned, the slight step of the Alberta Parole Board was one. But Albertans expected more of Jason Kenney. And Paul and I have talked before for stories. Every time Jason Kenney refuses to lift his lockdowns on benchmarks we've already reached, I'm sure the membership of Paul's party goes up. Every time that Prime Minister Trudeau opens his mouth and says something, the phone in Paul's office rings, people looking for memberships. The Western Standard had an exclusive poll a short time ago saying, the thoughts of separation have never been higher in Alberta. That said, I think if a vote was held today, I don't think it would pass. But every month I think it gets closer and closer. So, unless Kenney takes concrete steps to get that fair deal, I only see it as increasing.
Yeah, there's not going to be a fair deal. The federal government has no incentive to give Alberta anything because Ottawa doesn't think that Alberta is serious about independence. And they think you're gutless. They think Alberta is gutless and that you won't do a thing, Corey. That's the reality.
And Jason Kenney is like every other politician from the West. They want to go out east. They want to be successful. And it's been very clear who Jason's working for. It's for the federal politicians and for Ottawa. He hasn't stood up or did any of the things that he promised. But it's not about a fair deal. It's about the firewall. It's time that we take back all of the powers that we're supposed to be taking care of, whether that's healthcare, whether it's our own police force, immigration. We should have our own pension plan. We should have our own employment insurance policy. But it's what I call the firewall plus. No more are we going to have Ottawa elitists, hypocrites, enviro hypocrites, who say that we're not looking after our environment and shutting down our oil and gas industry, which is the gold standard around the world for environmental friendliness, for labor laws. It's up there. It's a beacon to the world, and they want to shut that one down. And it's not good enough. And so we need to have our own environmental act. But the big thing is, and where Jason can come in and do something is we actually need to collect all the taxes. People will say you can't do it. We'll try and stop us. We need to collect all the taxes, and we'll start looking at the federal programs. We'll say which ones that, we'll support the military. Yes, we'll support intelligence. Yes, we'll support border security. But all of the political slush funds that our money is going so that Ottawa can buy votes, it's got to stop. And the only way you do that is to create the Alberta Revenue Agency. Every tax dollar is collected here, and then we'll sit down and bargain with Ottawa. But the most important thing about doing all of those things is Albertans will then realize that, wow, we have our own bank account, we have our own business, we have our own house. Why on earth are we paying $20 billion a year for membership in a club that hates us and wants to shut down our industry?
The federal government hates you. The Liberals hate Alberta. The rest of the country does not hate Alberta. The problem is, I think you're right. Jason Kenney cannot be trusted to push that agenda because he's got his eye on Ottawa. And I think he thinks he's too good for Alberta. I mean, that's at the core of it. I mean, in my opinion, he went back to Alberta, as a stepping stone to do something else. He's not there. He's not a Ralph Klein, a guy who's going to be fighting, who's spent all his time fighting for Alberta, and that's why people loved Ralph Klein. They don't love Jason Kenney, and they never will. It was interesting hearing Paul talk about the National Energy Board. There's this great story in Blacklock's Reporter. Get this, cabinet given scant minutes. Now we're going back to 1980 here, so we're going back a while. But cabinet at the time under Pierre Trudeau was given minutes to read the tax plan. Then Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau gave his own cabinet a few minutes to hurriedly review the National Energy Program the very day it was introduced to Parliament. Boy, that's an eye-opener. It's not like cabinet spent a whole lot of time, Paul, poring over this document. He basically said, here it is, you're voting in favor of it. End of story. And I dare say that Justin hasn't fallen far from that tree. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, that story's on our website, and it really is an incredible look at what happened back then. Days after the policy was announced and the outrage from Alberta was incredible, the cabinet ministers were warned they should not go to Calgary. They were told not to show their faces here because of the fear of protest. And this was a deal cooked up with Pierre Elliott and Marc Lalonde, and they sprung it on cabinet. And it's a great piece by Blacklock's Reporter, who have been trying to get these papers for 5 years now to access information, and have been stymied every way. But and a couple of incredible stories. Trudeau wanted to set up his own national
lottery. The Liberal Party lottery.
Yeah, a Liberal Party lottery, believe it or not. And the proceeds would go to support them. So I encourage people to go to the website and read them, because they're extremely well researched and well done. But and that's where all the hatred starts, right from the moment that Trudeau introduced the NEP.
And that's the environment. Just getting back, that's the environment that Justin Trudeau grew up in, right? You look at the disdain with which Pierre Trudeau held for his own cabinet. We all knew that he thought they were a bunch of nobodies, right?
Yeah,
he called them that.
Yeah, we're the ugly, dirty stepdaughter that everybody's embarrassed about on what we do. They don't even realize that all the work that we're doing is helping them out. But probably the most frustrating thing for myself and many Albertans that I talk to is that we had a Prime Minister Harper from the West, from Calgary. And yet, what did he do when it came time to realize? And again, if you're actually in the interest of the country, Alberta's economy was growing. They could have kept using that, but instead they stymied it. He never got through Northern Gateway. He was hesitant on it. Why? Because he wanted to stay elected and be incremental. And we've never had a premier or a prime minister that's actually thought of even the country and the benefit that Alberta would be. It's always, no, we got to oppress these people. We got to hold them back. They can't be successful. We can't make them strong. And that attack has been constant since the 80s, and they're doubling down on it now. And the fact of the matter is that to talk about Keystone XL, are you kidding me? Obama, 2008, slammed that shut. And I thought, wow, what a gift for Prime Minister. He can now say it's in our national interest. We're building pipelines to the coast and get it done. And instead they continue fighting down south. Why? Not because they love Alberta, not because they want prosperity here. There's another reason behind their minds. And they've been, again, charlatans.
And while we're shutting down, whoa, what is that? That sounds awful. Do you hear that?
No.
All right, I guess it's in my ear. It sounds like Satan telling me to say something. All right,
Mark, I hear it. It sounds like Corey's being eaten by a dinosaur.
Thank you. I thought I was hearing voices there for a second. I mean, all the time, even as we're talking about destroying the resource sector, and in fact, exactly, I mean, the Trudeau and Harper utterly failed, and that Trudeau came in and made matters even worse. No Northern Gateway, no Energy East, and yet we're continuing to import oil from the likes of Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Nigeria, some of these terribly repressive countries. And I had this conversation with the leader of the Green Party. I said, why is it that you are in favor of stopping the pipelines while you don't favor ending imports from these countries, these reprobate regimes which treat their own people like garbage, are basically racist. They throw gay people off buildings. They treat women like second-class citizens. Why is it that you favor bringing in oil from these regimes, but you are hell-bent against the rolling out of pipelines? And I think you raised an excellent point here, Paul. I think Ottawa has always been reticent about strengthening the West. They've been afraid of the West. They are afraid that Alberta will continue to grow, that Saskatchewan will continue to grow, that BC will continue to grow, and that influence, eventually political influence, will be sucked from the East to the West as people gravitate towards the jobs and the economic opportunities. I think this is a reprehensible policy by a successive group of politicians in Ottawa who are hell-bent against the idea of Alberta growing its economy and becoming more of a force in Canada. I think it's an absolutely destructive policy.
Yeah, there's nothing worse. This is like your star player, and I'm sorry I'm old, but this is like telling Gretzky, you're doing too good. We got to take time off, or we got to give you a shorter stick, or like, are you kidding? In Hollywood, they love their superstars. On the sports field, we love our superstars, but yet when the most important thing for your economy and the well-being of your country, they despise. They have animosity towards it. There's just again this little attitude that I don't know. I call it the crab-like mentality. You're not going to let the other person climb out ahead of you, even realizing that that's the person that's going to lift us up and help us be successful. No, they can't be successful, and they'll cut off their nose in spite of their face to see
exactly that. And it's a zero-sum game with these people.
Yep.
Right? It's a zero-sum game. So if Alberta gains, that means that Ottawa loses or that Quebec loses. They don't see, well, if Alberta wins, we all win. That's a great thing. But
they don't even acknowledge the $600 billion that they've gotten and said, wow, we need more. They've benefited so much distributing that around and creating the socialist programs that they have and the dependency of so many provinces on Ottawa's gifts to get the votes, but yet they want to cut that golden goose. They want to cut the head off, and then how are they going to be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Where's Quebec going to get all that money, the $13 billion a year in transfer payments? From where? Where is that going to come from once Alberta and its economy goes downhill to the point where they don't have the kind of money that's going to be spreading out across the country? At that point, Quebec might say, well, look, there's nothing in it for us. If we're not going to be able to suck money from the West, then there's no point in staying in Canada. I mean, where's the mentality there? I mean, it's like these people are so short-sighted, so full of hate for the West with these attitudes that they have, that they would rather just hurt Alberta. Keep it down, keep Alberta down. But what I want to know is when are Albertans going to wake up? Because this didn't just start yesterday, Corey. I mean, this has been going on for decades.
2023 is when Albertans are going to show their true colors and realize that, let's vote for Alberta. Let's vote for our Firewall Plus. And then once we've got our house in order, I mean, I love the analogy of Julia Roberts in Sleeping with the Enemy. We're sleeping with the enemy. That the enemy wants to hurt us. They want to control us. They want to stop us. And we've got 2 years to get out there, talk to Albertans, and then once we form government, we'll be able to put our house in order and show Albertans that, look, we're going to be very successful as a sovereign nation. And when Albertans are at that 75% in the polls, realizing that, we don't have anything to fear except for Eastern Canada and the Laurentian elites. Let's do it. And again, Northern BC, perhaps all of BC, Saskatchewan, they're all looking for us for leadership, in my opinion, to how are we going to get out of this mess? How are we going to get off this Titanic well, to me, we've already hit the iceberg. Everybody says that the economy is unsinkable, $1 trillion worth of debt. Why would we as Albertans want to be part of that? We've already got $115 billion debt we got to take care of. We can't look after ours and Ottawa, and we got to say, sorry, it's been good, but it's over.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I thought Corey was still around. We lost Corey, but what do you think about that? You want to pick up the ball from what Paul just said?
Yeah, I think Corey's in the background being eaten by the dinosaurs. Or I just want to. Our Edmonton reporter Alex Dollywall just noticed where he's saying that Darth Vader is taking over the show. But, I think that there's one interesting thing I'd maybe like to ask Paul about, and
sure.
Going back to our poll, it showed his party doing very well in the province, and the pollsters said if keeps going that way, they could get some seats, which I think would be an incredible achievement for such a young party. But on the federal scene, the Maverick Party still is not getting anything. They're polling at like 2 or 3%. Maybe it's just because of the people don't like the name, or because they're not doing much publicity. But their stated goal, was to become like the Bloc Québécois in the House of Commons and represent Alberta that way. So I'm just wondering, Paul, why are you doing so well provincially, but the Mavericks aren't doing well federally?
Well, that's an excellent question, Dave. And I think there's 2 points on that you do that. Number one, even if we send out all of our MPs, I don't know, what is it, 66 we've got out of 300 and something, like all that really is a protest vote to say, you know what, Conservative Party of Canada, you're not going to represent us, so we're not going to vote your people in there. But it's not going to change the dynamics. It's not going to help Alberta in any way. It's just sending a message to say, hey, we really are ticked off, and we're not going to help the Conservatives form government because they've never done anything for us. But when you look at Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada, it's principled. I mean, he was at the Freedom Talk conference this weekend, and he talked about radically decentralizing the federal government, and he wants provinces to be independent and self-sufficient, and his policies are such. But when you go to the Maverick Party, like I say, what can they really do for us? Except for stop the Conservatives and say, you know what, you guys don't deserve our vote, so we're going to give it to the Maverick Party because they're not going to support you in pillaging Alberta, because that's what the Conservatives have done. It's what the Liberals promised to do, but the Conservatives continue to pillage that. But the individual talked about 34 Alberta seats, but there's 34 I think in BC, and I don't know, 20 in Saskatchewan, that they're trying to run in 3 provinces and part of Manitoba, I believe, as well. But human nature is that we don't like to do things that we know are for no purpose. And again, I don't think that Albertans have seen a purpose yet other than a protest vote for the Maverick Party. And again, we need to send that protest down there, in my opinion. But boy, we want to vote for something that we believe in and it's going to accomplish something. And that's what the Wildrose Independence Party is about. That firewall plus becoming independent, and then letting Albertans in a real referendum that's going to mean something to vote for sovereignty.
Well, until Albertans get serious and elect a party like yours, Paul, the rest of the country is just going to yawn. They're just saying it's just more whining from Alberta. We've heard it all before. We know they're not going anywhere. That's why it was such a terrible idea to ever take independence off the table. Because once you do that, that's your big bargaining chip. That's why Quebec has never taken it off. They're too smart for that. So you'll never hear Quebec say, well, we would never, ever, ever go our own way. Independence is completely off the table. They know that as soon as they do that, that's a huge bargaining chip that they no longer have. So they always want to keep it there, and that's why they elect people in the Bloc. That's why there's a provincial party that's dedicated towards separation. It's always there in the backdrop. And Justin Trudeau, being from there, of course, favoring Quebec anyway. I mean, Quebec always has the whip hand. And until Alberta learns a few things from the way Quebec has conducted its business, I know that's going to sound terrible to some people in Alberta, but the fact is Alberta could learn a lot from the way that Quebec has managed to finagle its, to get the lion's share in many cases of the money from the rest of the country.
I'm going to argue back on that a little bit, in the fact that we're very different. Alberta, we have the industry, we have the vehicle, we have the keys to the vehicle, and we have the revenue coming in for the work that we do. But we send it all out to Ottawa for them to use, and then we ask the bullies, hey, we need some lunch money back, and they laugh at us as, oh, sorry, it's all spent. Quebec has been the teenager in the basement of the house, demanding the credit card, demanding the car, demanding gas, and going out and having a great time. Alberta's not in that situation. We actually have the industry, we have the people, the resources, the land. I mean, when you look around the world, where would you find the amount of universities that we have here in Alberta on a per capita basis? You look at the resources, you look at the land, the agriculture, the timber. We are, I want to say, second to none around the world that the opportunity is here. What's causing our problem? It's an overbearing federal government that doesn't want us to succeed, and they're doing a darn good job at oppressing us.
Yeah, but you've got to do something about that. I mean,
That's why
you're allowing Ottawa to do this to you.
That's why the Wildrose
Alberta is allowing Alberta is allowing Ottawa to kick it in the head every chance it gets. Treat it like a
But again, we only have federal politicians that are charlatans. They say they're standing up for Alberta, but they fail. They fail time and time again. That's why Alberta, it's about independence movement. It's about standing up for ourselves. And again, you got to realize that there really hasn't been a movement since the 1980s at the NEP. But things are so much worse now with all of the environmental rules and regulations and the federal policies. You think of the 1980s and the social programs and the spending that Ottawa was doing then, and compare that to 2020. This is a new world. Albertans are going to have an opportunity in 2023, and there's going to be many Wildrose Independence members that are going to work hard, boots on the ground, talk to their friends, get out the message, go to wildrose.party, look at our policies, because there finally is an option where we want to be conservatives, small government, free market, let people go out there and be the entrepreneurs, the brilliance that they are, let the capital money come in, low taxation. We've got an awesome opportunity. It's just that we're beaten down and we're low, but we'll spring back.
Yeah, and I'm sure you will. But at some point, Albertans have to, for lack of a better word, say, yeah, it's time. We've waited long enough. Ottawa will never give us our due because they don't have to. There's no incentive for them to make any move. I mentioned this, earlier on in the discussion. And as long as they think that Albertans are never going to seriously look at independence, they don't have to give you a thing. They can hog all the wealth. They can boot Alberta in the backside time and time again because it refuses to vote Liberal. And so nothing is going to change until Alberta finally says, it's over, we're done, we're out of here, goodbye, Canada. I don't know, what do you think, Dave?
You know what? You may be right. I think one of the big problems Jason Kenney is going to have to overcome right now is what you touched on before. And if you're an oil company and you got $1 billion to spend, there's no way you would spend it in Alberta at the moment, because it's going to get you 10 years to get the project approved, if it's approved at all. So why would you bother? Go somewhere else. Kenny needs the economy to improve if he's going to, be able to help matters. But like I said earlier, it's going to be a long time, and Paul's party is striking a chord, I think, with Albertans at the moment, because they're not seeing any progress in talks with Ottawa. There's been none, really. So,
Dave, I got a comment, because one of the things that Jason did was he brought Kelvin Helen on, that I don't know if you're familiar with the Eagle Spirit Energy Pipeline or Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, but these are First Nations individuals that Jason brought on and during his campaigning, promised to work with them. But if he was serious about Alberta, he would be working with Kelvin. But as soon as he got elected, he dropped him like a hot potato. He has no desire, any more than any of the other charlatans out east, for a pipeline to the world market. And again, he's dropped it. I mean, again, I'm sure you're familiar with the Nova Gas expansion line that was supposed to, it got that the Canadian Energy Regulator gave it the go ahead a year ago, February 19th. And then it got hijacked by Bill 69 into cabinet. And instead of the 90-day time period, which Jason should have just been going ballistic, it was a $1.5 billion project here in Alberta. He promised jobs, 5,000 jobs, and he never said peep about it. And it wasn't until the 19th of October, 240 days later, that Justin's cabinet rolls out all these new extra conditions that the Canadian Energy Regulator says, no, those aren't reasonable. No, we don't expect those. Jason said nothing. He doesn't care about jobs. He doesn't care about our pipelines. And he certainly isn't going to stand up to Ottawa when that's where he wants to go. And he doesn't want to offend any Canadian. We need a new premier. We need someone who'll stand up for Alberta, put our house in order, and then let Albertans vote.
Let's talk about the upcoming federal election, because it looks like they're getting ready to go. You've got a leader of the Conservative Party who has, frankly, flip-flopped, even shown indicators indications that he's moving in favor of some kind of carbon tax, although you hear different things. O'Toole himself has said, no, we're not going to do that. But on the other hand, nobody's really convinced. He doesn't do it with any great vigor. So you always think that he's going to pitch something like cap and trade in order to try and get votes from the GTA and other urban areas where you're going to find where, frankly, the Tories do need seats. If it turns out, and polls suggest that it's possible that the Liberals end up winning a majority government, what would that do to the sentiment about concerning independence in Alberta, do you think? Dave or Paul?
As I've said before, and I'll quickly throw it to Paul, but every time Trudeau says something, his phone rings off the hook. And if Trudeau gets reelected again, holy cow, stand back, right, Paul?
Oh, like he said it, he wants to shut down the oil and gas industry. Look at the policy. Look at Bill C-12. C-12 will decimate that will be the nail in our coffin. And Albertans we're going to fight. When you can be, passive and not do anything, but when you're getting in the chokehold and you're losing your breath, your instincts go back to fight. And so Trudeau, he's actually going to be the blessing that will ignite that fight in Albertans to say, wow, this guy really is trying to kill us. He wants to destroy our industry. He wants to destroy our entrepreneurship, our independence, our values of working hard and providing for our families and letting our kids have a future. He wants to destroy all of that. And again, he said, this is a great opportunity for the global reset. And what do they say? You will own nothing and you will be happy. And there isn't a place in the world where you own nothing and you're happy that I'm aware of.
Yeah. You're starting to see a little bit of panic in the ranks of the Conservative Party of Canada as they see support for their party now sink to around 41%. That's kind of low for them. I mean, the Liberals could actually win a seat or two.
Yep.
I mean, it's quite possible if the splits go their way in certain areas of Edmonton or Calgary, they could walk away with 2 or 3 seats. It wouldn't shock anybody if that were to happen. And I think the Conservative Party now realizes that Aaron O'Toole has gone too far the other direction. He is now alienating Albertans, as well as many people in the western part of the country. And so I think that they're going to look seriously at getting rid of this guy, maybe even before the next federal election. A lot of Conservatives would not lament the departure of Aaron O'Toole.
Well, he's a turncoat, and then it comes to fruition. Both with O'Toole and Jason have said, we've got to look and do better at meeting the Paris Accord. The Paris Accord is about shutting down Alberta. And I'm always amazed, why is it they want to attack us, but yet they never say anything about all those rogue nations and just the atrocities that go on in those countries. And yet they want to point at us. Why? Because they want to destroy the economy, that they can't. Governments can oppress people 2 ways, either intellectually and that they don't understand, or else economically. And Alberta, it has to be an economic oppression, and that's all guns are blazing to destroy the economy. And COVID has been a great opportunity, and Jason has played into Justin's hands. He could be like Florida, he could be like South Dakota, where you have an opportunity here. He could have created a robust healthcare system. We've had a year to do it. He's done nothing except for play along with that COVID hand to hurt our economy even more.
Yeah. I mean, if the federal government hates oil, let them ban imports from Saudi Arabia or Qatar or the United Arab Emirates or Nigeria or all these other countries, Venezuela, all these horrifically vile regimes that are selling us their oil at the world price when we could be buying it from our own province.
Well, but they say that, for every economy, what do they say? Buy local, buy local. It's the best thing that we could do for Canada is to buy that oil and gas, that energy, and yet they don't. And it just goes to show their spite and their animosity towards us.
And they're such frauds. They talk about the environmental concerns about Alberta oil, but they would rather import oil via tanker, across the ocean where anything can go wrong. It's an absolute fraudulent argument. I posed that to the leader of the Green Party. She didn't know what to say. She needed help from her EA to bail out of that. There's no excuse. I said to her, look, so when you take over, are you going to ban oil imports? You hate oil, so you're going to ban oil imports from all those other countries? And she said, all I got was she drew a blank. And so you would rather buy oil from them than buy oil, and your own brother is in the oil patch. Why not put a couple of bucks in his pocket? It's an absolutely fraudulent argument, and that's why Albertans need to fight back on this point. I wanted to ask you as well of the geopolitical circumstances across the continent, because now you're seeing things beginning to fracture. And I'm talking about U.S. states,
Texas,
you look at Texas all the way up through Alaska. I mean, that huge long corridor that includes a good chunk of the far north of Atlantic of Canada, right down Alberta, Saskatchewan, and we're talking about Montana, Idaho, all these deep red states, Wyoming, Oklahoma, right down to the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, is it possible that with all the upset being caused by Biden now, I mean, the United States isn't even energy independent anymore? It took Biden, a couple of months to destroy that. If people get mad enough that they'll fight back and say, look seriously at secession the way you are, Paul. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's secession from the rest of Canada. Is it possible that there might be some kind of new country formed with like-minded U.S. states, like Alaska, like Montana? Do you see some kind of union between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and those U.S. states?
I think that, if you'd have asked me this 4 months ago, and, all conservatives were convinced that Trump was going to win again, not a problem. But the world's in turmoil around the world, and conservatism and the free market is just being viciously attacked by these environmentalists and these globalists, that they want to shut that down. They want to rule the world. They want to rule our lives. But there is many, I want to say, freedom fighters, patriots that understand that the whole movement forward of humanity and the prosperity has always been based on a good government that protects the individuals. But yet when you have these socialist, communist groups that want to take away ownership, it doesn't work. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say that it's out of the realm when we see what's happening. Texas is moving hard, and there's just a lot of those states, Missouri, a lot of them are moving. And it's certainly possible, but I see sovereignty of individual nations and then having agreements much easier than trying to form a new massive country. I can see, we had East and West Germany. I see Western Canada very easy being formed. Once Alberta declares sovereignty, other people are going to say, hey, we don't want to be part of that sinking ship. We see a future here in Western Canada. Let's join ranks, and we can be strong and free like we're supposed to be.
Yeah, I've made the case on my radio show a number of occasions that there's really only two political forces at work these days. It's not so much about parties. It's more about whether you believe in freedom or whether you believe in fascism. And so if Albertans believe in freedom and other parts of Canada move in favor of a super state, this kind of all-encompassing government that runs all aspects of your life, you're going to see a massive move out west by people who don't want a communist style government. Or the prime minister himself spoke about his admiration for Chinese style totalitarianism. So it's not a joke. It's not a conspiracy theory. We've heard it straight from his mouth. This guy is a wannabe dictator, Corey. I mean, if things were to fracture along the lines of freedom versus totalitarianism, I don't know, Alberta would be primed, I think, Corey, for a move for real solid growth for people who do not want that kind of. I know I would be headed west in a heartbeat if it ever came down to that.
Yeah, well, and this isn't unprecedented. It's just new for us out here. So we start getting down the road to think of what a post-secession might look like. But look to Sweden and Norway. They were all one country once. They split with a referendum, and they're very close. It doesn't mean you don't have to be civil afterwards as well. Slovakia and the Czech Republic, same thing, bloodless. They separated, but they're still very close nations. They're not having big border skirmishes or anything like that. You still visit family on the other side, but they're maintaining those things that they felt were important enough to them that they had to separate from being one larger group. And I think it's very well possible in Canada. We're getting increasingly dysfunctional. I mean, as Paul was saying, we have these ebbs and flows of secessionism in the West, but every time it leaves behind some dedicated, hardcore people who've had enough. And there's more every time. And this next election might be the tipping point, or maybe it'll be one more after that, but we're getting really close because nothing is changing.
All right. So you buy that, Dave? I mean, we've heard this story before. You've been at this game a long time. And we've heard Albertans being disgruntled, unhappy with the state of affairs. And let's face it, nothing really happened. Nothing really changed. Why do you think this, if in fact you do think so, will things be different this time?
Well, I think Cord just hit the nail on the head, Mark. Every time something happens, there's another stepping stone that is left behind. And, every stepping stone brings you close to being able to peer over the top of the wall. So, you know what? As a journalist, it's going to be an interesting few years to cover politics out west. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been a number of comments. Let's see. Somebody mentioned, don't forget the blue one. Not sure what they're referring to there. It needs.
That would be your new political party in Ontario, Mark.
Oh yes, that's right. Blue Ontario. Yep. I forgot about this. A lot of disappointment in Ontario over. It's very reminiscent of what you're going through in Alberta, where we thought we were getting this rock-ribbed conservative in the form of Doug Ford, and we ended up getting somebody who's frankly sounding and looking a lot more liberal every day. But his poll numbers have stayed strong. But I think that there's a real undercurrent of unhappiness over COVID and the lockdowns. Why don't we pivot over to that discussion, because we haven't really gone too deeply down that road yet. How much unhappiness is there in Alberta right now amongst those who feel that that Jason Kenney has not moved quickly enough from step 2? Are you in step 2 right now as was moving towards step 3?
We just reopened phase 2, but this came after we had exceeded benchmarks that the Premier had set. We were well underneath ICU target levels and hospital admission levels and daily case levels, and Albertans expected, you know what, we did the hard work. It's time for us to get back into the game. And the anger that came about when people realized that it wasn't going to happen was quite palpable. And the Wildrose Independence Party, since the very beginning, Paul has put out very strong statements about his party's opposition to it, and I think that's also hit a tone, hasn't it, Corey?
Okay, Corey, you want to weigh in on this?
That's been a terrible frustration. I mean, those benchmarks were clear. We had a restaurant revolution starting. That's part of why they kind of rushed to give a light at the end of the tunnel. They said, okay, here's because they saw no reopening plan. They saw no path to reopening. These are people going bankrupt. So they were saying, you know what, we're going to open anyways. Broke is broke. What's your fines mean? I'm going to lose my house anyhow. So they started opening, and there was that one weekend, I think up to a dozen. And Kenny did a quick Monday conference and said, okay, this is it. This is the plan. A week from now, we're going to do this. And these are the benchmarks for further ones. So people were kind of calmed down. So, okay, if we behave, if the infections stay low, and we stay under, the bar was 450 hospitalizations. That was the big bar for step 2. If we do that, and here's all these things we're going to do. Well, we came in at 250. Like, wow, we didn't just meet the bar. We blew it out of the water. And they went and erased the chalkboard. They moved the goalposts. They said, we're going to allow 15% capacity in libraries, which wasn't even part of step 2. And you could do Pilates. Like, it was ridiculous. And they did a big press conference for this. It really reduces confidence in believing what they're saying when they're telling us things and wondering if they even know what the hell they're doing.
Paul, I mean, governments at some point they decided to attack us. They're not on our side. Government. I go on the show on a daily basis. The government is not your friend anymore. Remember, government has decided to turn on its people. Government has decided it wants a war against us, and I say it's time to give it to them. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the worst thing that we can do, and you talk about Albertans, but they haven't done anything. Well, this COVID is a bigger problem. And again, it brings tears to your eyes. But I met a lady this weekend that her son committed suicide last September when he didn't go back to school. 16 years old. The number of stories that we're hearing, and again, I know 3 people now with gyms that they finally closed the doors and they're done. I mean, why would he attack our health clubs, if you want to call them that, gyms, and not allow them? And even with this release in there, but no, their response to COVID and this, again, they announced today they're going to spend, they're going to do 1 million quick tests to try and help things out. Their goals, as Corey said, that they're never static, but they're always moving. And it's quite evident to me that that's because they want to keep us shut down. They want us to hurt. They want to stop us, and they just keep, letting enough air each time that, we'll stop the uprising. But I was excited, started to go to these restaurants that were going against the will of the Premier and Henshaw. But they are hurting people, and they're hurting them bad, emotionally, physically, and again, taking the life of too many Albertans. I mean, abuse is up, abusive substances are up, everything is up, but they deny it. And again, today, I only listened to part of the announcement, but the big thing was, 1,900 Albertans have died of this. 5 of them are healthcare workers. Well, what about the other 18,000 that died? Why does nobody else count except for COVID? And this, I don't know, this is a pointed attack on Albertans that shouldn't be. And again, it just gives us wind in our sail because it's wrong. Again, government's job for me is, and again, we're talking about a conservative government, they should be out looking for the best information and informing us, and then letting Albertans make the risk decisions. If you want to open your business, if I want to go to the gym, if I want to go, swimming with my kids, let us make those decisions. We don't need, and this
That's exactly right.
This is the problem with central government too. There are hot spots. I don't deny that. But to shut down Medicine Hat, to shut down, lots of rural communities, I'm sorry, this is categorically wrong. Those communities are safe. There's not a problem there. And one size fits all central government, it destroys people, their livelihood, and their hope for the future.
Yeah, it sounds like Jason Kenney is all in on the Great Reset. It's the same Great Reset that Justin Trudeau is in on. The destruction of the economy in order to bring in something new in which you'll have nothing, that you'll all be reliant on government. You'll get your shots every 6 months, go home, live in your little cubby hole, get a few crumbs from government, and that's your life from here on in. Well, the hell with that. And Albertans need to be a place where they fight back and go back to the way they were, because these scumbag politicians cannot be trusted. They need to go. They need to be run off on a rail. These people have blood on their hands. I've used strong language on my show, and I'm using it again tonight. These people are a fraud. They're bloody criminals. I mean, I've actually suggested that we start charging some of these people. When you look at the number of people who have died as a result of drug abuse, the opiate abuse that has exploded, the number of suicides, all the missed surgeries and other medical procedures that have forced people to stay home, so they haven't gotten the treatments that they need for cancer and diseases like that. People end up dying because of this thing, all for what? For COVID? Give me a break. This is a lie. It's a fraud. And we need to fight back as Canadians right across this country. I want to wrap things up a little bit. I want to give a final word to each one of you on this subject. And I realize we bounced all over the place. We started off with this question around whether Jason Kenney, what went wrong? Is he still a conservative? Can he turn things around? I think we've moved on from there, frankly. Albertans don't want to turn things around with this guy. They just want him gone. Am I wrong here, Dave?
Buddy, I'm kind of worried about your blood pressure at the moment.
I feel great. I mean, no, seriously, I feel good. And you know what? I'm going to tell you, when you're up against a bully, he's going to keep taking your lunch money until you fight back. Then he's going to take your lunch money one day. He's going to take your shoes the next, your jacket the day after that, until you punch him in the face. It's time to punch these bastards in the face. I'm sorry if I sound nasty, but I've had it with these people. I'm done with them.
No,
anyway, that's my take.
And you know what? You're not alone in that feeling at all. I think there's as a last word, I think there's a huge letdown in Alberta at the moment. I think people are very, very disappointed in Jason Kenney's leadership to this date. The NDP is killing him in the polls. The WIP is doing well in the polls. And he's got a short time to turn it around.
I mean, I'm not advocating violence, by the way. I'm saying I don't want anybody literally punched in the face. I'm using the term figuratively speaking. And using nice language and saying, well, maybe, we're disappointed. And these people are just going to push the envelope. I mean, what did it take at the end of the day, Corey? I mean, it took restaurant owners to say, screw you, we're opening. And then that's the only time you got any action out of Kenney, because they felt it slipping away. They said, well, it's slipping away. So, okay, well, wait a minute, we'll just do this and we'll do that. Well, screw that. Maybe it's time to open up the economy. And if the government wants to start shutting people down, let them do it. I don't know. What do you think?
No, that's the absolute truth. And I thought it was heartening, actually, to see, because, I mean, the Canadian politeness is a nice thing, but it's a handicap. It makes us dish mats, and we've got to get up and push back at times. And that was an example of it. And it showed how bloody fast that government backpedaled when they saw the signs of a revolution. When they saw those restaurants go from two to 4 to a dozen, it's amazing how fast that press conference and plan came together. Something that was...
Well, then do it again. Why did they back off then? I mean, they were winning. Why stop there? Why?
Well, we're still too damn passive, but hopefully we start learning from this and realizing, like, this government will back off. They will listen to us, but we got to speak the hell out.
But you have to push the envelope. It's just like Ottawa. Paul, I think if you really wanted to push Ottawa to the table, have a referendum. And then all of a sudden, somebody over there in Ottawa will wake up and go, oh, wait a minute, what, we're losing the country now? I mean, BC's way out in left field, so they're going to be cut off. These guys are serious. Then you get the kind of discussion that you need. But by that point, I don't know if Albertans even want to have a discussion. They just want to go. Last word to you.
It's not about a discussion. It's about the firewall plus, putting our house in order, looking after our future, and then letting Albertans vote for sovereignty. This is a broken, dysfunctional relationship. We don't need more government. We don't need more spending. We don't need more COVID restrictions. We don't need more taxes going up. All of those things are against everything that we need here. What we need is more pipelines. We need more oil going. We need more freedoms. We need less government. We need to just cut back, be conservative, and let the free market do what the free market does. Let the entrepreneurs move in. But no, we've got to take hold of our future, and the only way we do that is by the firewall plus, and say no to Ottawa, and they can come back knocking on our door, but in my opinion, it's way too late.
Well, independence is the biggest card you got to play it. So don't take that off the table. Make sure that you're feeding into the flames. Keep throwing kerosene on that fire, Paul, because it's the only thing that's going to get people out my way to listen.
This is all about Wildrose Nation. You talk
Wildrose
about
Nation.
No, this is
all right.
This is Wildrose Nation, and that's where our future is, and it's about sovereignty, and we're going to do it this time because 2023 is our last chance. This is kind of like coming up the third time before you drown. 2023, I really believe that Albertans, given the opportunity, are going to say yes to freedom, yes to accountable government. We need people that you can actually recall and fire. We need citizens initiative referendum on issues that the politicians won't touch. There's so many things that we can and provide for Albertans for good government, and yet Jason Kenney is failing on all accounts, and it's very frustrating for Albertans.
Get rid of this guy. Gone. Out of there. All right. Thank you, Paul Hinman, Corey Morgan, Dave Naylor. Guys, we've had a great discussion. Really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a real honor to talk to people right across the country, including, of course, Alberta, a wonderful province. I mean, I hope that Alberta stays in Canada forever. I wish there was a way to accommodate Albertans, but sadly, it may come down to exactly the kinds of things that Paul is pushing in order to make to get a real fair deal for his people. So I don't hold that against anybody pushing independence in Alberta, considering the way that province has been treated. I want to thank you all out there for tuning in tonight. Once again, this has been a transmission of the Western Standard Online. Check it out. Check all of Dave's story. There's a bunch of great content on that website. And Derek Fildebrand, of course, publisher, has done a terrific job as well. And these broadcasts have been a lot of fun as well. As for me, you can listen to my radio show on Saga 960. And if you're outside the GTA, you can hear us online on saga960am.ca. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the evening, wherever you happen to be. Bye-bye for now. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.